What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Botania, and today we're going to be setting up an automated mystical flower farm. So chances are when you first start out with Botania, you're going to gather your mystical flowers manually simply by running around your world and trying to find as many different colors as you possibly can. And that's exactly what I did, as you guys saw last episode. And if we look at my flower pouch, it worked out pretty well for me. I think I found 14 of the 16 different colors. I have the brown and yellow that are still missing, although it looks like on that little hill over there, there are some mystical brown flowers. So it's definitely not hard to come across pretty much every color, but it's still a little bit tedious to manually gather these all the time because you are going to absolutely burn through these flowers since you use them to craft pretty much everything you're going to use in Botania. Whether you're starting out very early on or you are extremely late game, you're going to need a ton of these regardless. So today we're going to be going over how we can automate the generation, the breaking, and the collection of mystical flowers so that all we have to do is go into a chest and pick out whatever ones we want, and we'll do all of this simply by supplying a little bit of mana. So I think this is an extremely useful setup to have early on, and then you should never run into any problems having any color of mystical flower from that point forward. So everything we need for today's episode is in this chest right here. You can feel free to pause the video if you want to check and make sure you have everything needed to follow along, but either way we should be good to start doing some crafting, and I'm actually going to take a slightly different approach in today's episode and see how you guys like it. So we're going to do a time lapse of the crafting, so hopefully it'll be a little bit more bearable for those of you that don't care too much but still don't want to skip it, and for those of you that still want to see it, well, it's still going to be there. With that said though, there is one thing of crafting we have to do on camera today, and that is because it's totally new. It's going to be using the Runic altar to do crafting, which is very similar to the petal apothecary, except it uses slightly different catalysts. So we're going to grab out the stuff that we're going to use in that to start, and then I'll hop off camera and do a little bit of a time lapse. So the first thing we need to do is craft the Runic altar itself, which is only going to take 5 living rock and then either a mana pearl or a mana diamond, which you simply get by tossing one of those into a mana pool, taking some of the mana out of it, and you're good to go. So we can just toss that stuff in here, definitely not too expensive, and now we have the Runic altar. Now I said this is very similar to the petal apothecary, and it is, but instead of using water and seeds, it's going to use mana, and it's going to use living rock. So over here, I have moved our setup for mana generation since, as you can probably tell, I've started assembling the base, but we're just going to put this down right over here because we need to give it mana, and eventually we'll have a slightly better mana transfer setup going later. Right now it's going to be a little bit scuffed. So to start out, we're going to look at the recipe that we're going to try to make right here, which is going to be the Rune of Air. And we can see the 5 different ingredients for this will be mana powder, mana steel, a carpet, a feather, and some string. So I've got all of those right here ready to go, and we can either toss them onto this, or I think right clicking is a bit easier because it's a little bit wonky. You have to be right up next to it to actually get them on there. Otherwise they might hit the side and bounce off, and then you kind of look stupid. So you can just right click them all in there. And there we go. So we now have all 5 different crafting materials in there. It makes a very cool kind of explosion sound. And we can see now that it is good to make the Rune of Air, except it's missing a couple things. So the first thing it's missing is mana. So what we're going to do is simply take out a mana spreader, put it down right next to this mana pool, and then we are just going to bind it to this right here, and you can see it starts firing off mana in here really quick, and we have a progress bar, or I guess it's more of a progress circle, going around the Rune of Air. Once that's full, we'll be able to craft it simply by tossing some living rock, which I forgot to grab out of this chest over here, but tossing a piece of living rock on top of it, and then using our Wand of the Forest. So now it's full. The nice thing is the mana spreader stops, so it's not just constantly firing mana here, but then we just right click on this with some living rock, then right click with the Wand of the Forest, and boom, we have 2 runes of air, and we're good to go. And this is how it's going to work for pretty much every rune you make in here. So again, instead of water and seeds, it's just going to be the same as the petal apothecary with mana and living rock. So now I'm going to do a time lapse for you guys, crafting up some more runes and doing the rest of the crafting so that we can jump right into the building. So the crafting is finally done. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that new format. If you did, feel free to let me know in the comments. But either way, if we take a look at my inventory, there's really not that much that we have in here right now because there's only about 5 or 6 different blocks that are required to make this setup work, which is great. It's very simple to do and it's going to be extremely useful. So to start out, this is the room we're going to be setting this up in. As I already said, I did start working on the base, but obviously it's going to take a while to make because it's made out of living rock bricks, which means I got a lot of living rock to generate, which I'm doing over there now with 4 pure daisies when I want to actually expand this. So it takes a lot of AFK time, but either way, this is the room we're going to be setting this up in, and it's going to be a 9x9 area because starting out, the jaded amaranthus is going to be the entire basis for this setup because this is going to be the flower that generates the mystical flowers by supplying it with a little bit of mana, and this works in a 9x9 area. So right here, we're going to place it down directly in the center of this room, and as you can see, because we have the Mana Seer's monocle, we can tell that it perfectly fills up the grass area in this room, and that's where all the mystical flowers are going to start popping up. They're going to pop up at random in here, filling in any open space there is, and it's going to give us just a random assortment of colors, which is great because in the end, we should have a pretty even distribution of every type of color. Now the next step is worrying about breaking the mystical flowers because this is going to generate them for us once we supply it with a bit of mana, but we also need to break them so they can then be collected. And we're going to do that using the Drum of the Wild, which is basically a placeable version of the Horn of the Wild, but for those of you that might have never used the Horn of the Wild either, like myself, it's basically going to break any plant in an area around it. And so in this case, we need to hit it with a mana pulse because it's a placeable block. It's not an item you can use in your inventory, and then it's going to break all the ones around it. So we're just going to put this down directly above the jaded amaranthus, and this is going to get mana directly from a mana pool. This is then going to require a pulse mana spreader to be able to fire off. So the next thing we need to do is deal with that whole mana supply. So we're going to grab out a diluted mana pool and a pulse mana spreader. So I'm going to put the diluted mana pool down right over here. I'm using a diluted mana pool because we are going to be attaching a mana spreader to our regular mana pool over there and firing it off over to this diluted mana pool, but I really don't want all the mana from over there to be brought over here. So the diluted mana pool having a much lower capacity will end up filling up, and we don't need to worry that all the mana we generate over here is going to get sucked over here, when I'd prefer to keep it there so we can transfer it to other things like using the Runic altar or potentially other builds that we make until I get a better mana transfer network set up, which is probably like number 1 on my priority list. So eventually we'll hook this up, but I don't want this to start growing yet. I want to get the rest of it set up first before we start firing it off. So the next thing is we're going to have to put down the pulse mana spreader, and we're going to put it down right on top of this diluted mana pool. And as we can see, it's going to end up pulling mana from the mana pool, and then we just need to end up putting it bound to the Drum of the Wild right here. So we just shift right click, and now it'll end up firing a burst of mana into the Drum of the Wild whenever it's given a redstone signal. And that's the important next step we need to take care of. We need to supply it with a redstone signal on a timer so that it can fire off at the appropriate times and actually break the flowers. So we're going to be using this awesome block that Botania adds called the hovering hourglass, which is a very easy to set up single block timer that's going to have the time that it works on based off of the amount of sand and type of sand that you put in it. So I'm going to put this directly above the pulse mana spreader. Doesn't matter where you put it adjacent to this, any side will work, but the hovering hourglass now needs to be supplied with some kind of sand. So regular sand per block that you add is going to add 1 second. If you use red sand, every block will add 10 seconds. And if you add soul sand, every block will add a minute. So you can only have one kind of sand in there at any given time. So I'm just going to use regular sand, and it immediately starts working. And if you're curious as to what time you've actually put in there, in case you didn't think through it a lot, well, you can just hover over it with the Wand of the Forest in your hand, and it'll tell you the amount of sand in there and the exact time per flip that it's going to take. Now, this does not necessarily need to be set at exactly a minute. It's totally up to you. But I will say if you set it for a very short period of time, you're not going to be generating a ton of flowers before this attempts to break them. And on top of that, you're also going to have it sounding like a drum and bass concert coming from wherever in your base this whole setup is, because the Drum of the Wild definitely has a very unique and interesting sound whenever it gets hit with a pulse of mana. And you'll hear that when this setup starts functioning, but I'm just warning you right now that it's going to be a little bit loud. So unless you want to be dealing with that or put down the flower that absorbs sound, I would definitely set this to be a reasonable amount of time between mana bursts that shoot out of here. Either way though, the next thing we need to set up is the collection step of this, and we're going to do that using a chest and the hopperhock. So we're going to be putting these down right here, and we're actually going to need to grab out a piece of dirt, and we're going to put the dirt down right here just so that we can put the hopperhock down. So we'll put that right here, and as we can see, its range is not covering this whole area. But if we were to bind it to this mana pool, and so that's good to go. We're also going to want to make sure this jaded amaranthus is also bound to this mana pool so they can pull mana from it. But this one, once this has mana, is going to end up having a range that'll collect all the items that get dropped in here. Because I believe right now it has a radius of 6, but eventually when you give it mana, its radius increases to 11. So once it has some mana, it should be totally fine. And then we're just going to put down a chest right here, and the hopperhock will drop whatever items it picks up directly into this chest. One thing I want to note is in case you're worried about the hopperhock picking up things that you don't want it to, in case this setup's close to another one, well, you can change your wand of the forest to the function mode by shift right clicking, and this is an example of where you can adjust the function of one of these flowers. So right now you can see it says pick up only items in item frames, but if you were to shift right click, it'll pick up only items not in frames, and the final one is you can pick up any items, but I believe this one prioritizes items that are in item frames first. So I'm fine with it picking up any item, but I may actually need to make adjustments because maybe it's going to end up being so far in range that it picks up some of the coal from over here. So that is an option you have, but I think we'll be totally fine. And for now, it's just going to pick up all the flowers that this ends up generating. So now we have the generation, the breaking, and the collection all set up and good to go. Both of these flowers, the functional ones, are linked to this diluted mana pool. This pulse mana spreader is going to fire off for the Drum of the Wild. So all we need to do is put down a mana spreader over here at this mana pool and have it start transferring mana over to this, and we should be good to go. So we can just put down a mana spreader right here, and it's basically already pointing at the correct direction. So we'll see right now that this is going to start planting flowers because mana is being supplied to the mana pool. Okay, so now everything is functioning properly. It's a little bit awkward when this first starts out because functioning flowers do have an internal buffer. As you can see here, you have the mana internally that's being pulled from this diluted mana pool. And so initially, the jaded amaranthus was pulling all the mana, and so this hopperhock's range was not yet increased by having mana supplied to it. Now, both of these have full internal buffers, which means that this diluted mana pool is able to fill up, and we can now have both of these running at maximum efficiency so that this one is appropriately collecting all the blocks, even the ones over there in that far corner that it otherwise would not. So we'll see in a second here when this fires off, you get to hear the very thumpy noise of the Drum of the Wild, and we'll get to see it break all of these flowers, and then they get collected by the hopperhock and put into the chest. So there we go. They all drop on the ground, and now they're all collected and put in this chest right here. And as you can see, we are getting a good assortment. So we are going to have majority of the different flowers, and I have the yellow ones now and the brown ones that I didn't have already. So this is definitely a super useful setup in my opinion. And you can use redstone to simply turn this off, whether you want to stop mana coming into this setup overall, or you want to stop the pulse mana spreader from firing off. I'm going to let this run for a while though, simply because I need a lot of flowers, and then eventually I'll turn it off later, and we should be good to go. Now it's generating a lot of these black flowers on this go around. My goodness, this is looking a little bit depressing in here. I just noticed that all of a sudden as a side note. But I will also touch on this because now it's later in the episode, but some of you might have noticed that I have done some upgrades to my gear. I don't have any actual armor on yet, but I will be making that soon. I have some mana steel items though, because it makes working with tools a lot easier. So all I have to do is refill this mana tablet, which I do over here, simply by tossing it down on the mana pool, and then all these mana steel tools will repair themselves using the mana from the tablet. So definitely nice to have set up early on. All you're going to do is make mana steel by dropping iron on top of the mana pool. Super cheap. and it'll make your lives a lot easier. So if you're starting out too and you're looking for some recommendations on tools and armor, I'd actually go with those because they're super convenient to have and you never really need to worry about durability, and then we can upgrade those to something better later. But hopefully you guys think the base is turning out pretty cool. Hopefully you're enjoying the series. If you have any recommendations on what you want to see built next, feel free to let me know. If we take a look in the Lexica Botania, we can see that there are challenges in here. And so this one, the flower farm, we can mark that as complete because that is one of the challenges and we're fully done. So thankfully we can go through a lot of these challenges too and have some fun with that. But I'm also totally up for making any builds that you guys would prefer to see, and it's just so satisfying watching this whole thing run. But I think that's going to be it for today, guys. I got to ramble on a bit at the end there. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss out on a future episode as they come out every Monday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will talk to you guys later.